Awesome. All right. Well, I'm sure we'll have some more people popping on, but just welcome everyone. Thank you for taking time out this evening for our very first Women's Wellness Exchange workshop, one of our peer-to-peer workshops for our members. And so just really excited to have a very distinguished panel of women and authors tonight. So thank you to our panelists for coming and sharing your wealth of knowledge. Um, the Women's Wellness Exchange is a home base for holistic health, and it's empowered by female entrepreneurs. And just we're really excited to come together to as a platform to help people find holistic healing through our wonderful website, and to support female entrepreneurs who are out there hustling, coaches, massage therapists, practitioners, authors, writers, all with a common cause to help people feel healthier and happier. So really excited to have our first workshop. So tonight we're going to do a couple things. I'm going to have the panelists each introduce themselves for just a minute or two and tell us about their book or books. And then we're going to walk through the three different areas of our of writing a book. So what it's like to create a book and conceive the book and write it and all that. And then we're going to talk about the production side, the editing, finding a publisher, finding an agent, and so forth. And then we're going to talk about how to market your book and put it out into the world, which sometimes feels like the hardest part. So I actually wrote a book called, it's a women's self-care journal, which I think might be the thing that I am most proud of for myself over the last 15 years, because it's a labor of love, as you guys will all talk about, but there's just something about that process of committing to doing it, bringing it to life, and really it's a wonderful experience. And just really, to me, it was that creative time, that creative process for bringing it to life, and the discipline and the creativity that I had to really focus on for almost a year. So with that said, I am going to first of all, I'm going to introduce Casey Matthews, because she was actually my book coach to help me bring my baby to life. So Casey, why don't you go ahead and tell us, and she's written several books, some really interesting books, and so why don't you go ahead and tell us about yourself and the books that you've created and brought to life.
Thank you. Hi, everybody. I love this organization, Tracy, and I'm so glad to be a part of it. I haven't written several. I've written two. The third is in the works. So my first is a memoir called Preemie: Lessons in Love, Life, and Motherhood. And my other book is called A Mom's Guide to Creating a Magical Life. And like Tracy spoke about there, also my labors of love, my heart and soul poured into them. And my book Preemie came out in 2012. Fortunately for me, it's evergreen. Unfortunately, because there continue to be premature births, it's my story of my personal transformation and learning to grow up when I was blessed with a daughter who was born halfway through my pregnancy at 25 weeks. And after major surgeries, nearly losing her many times, once she was home in our house, that was when my journey of healing began. And it was 7 years till I came up for air and realized that I was in this chronic state of anxiety. And it was actually writing this book that helped me heal and find myself again. And it was truly a labor of love, because there were so many moments when I didn't want to write it and go back to the trauma to revisit it, to bring it to life in that full formed way. But that's where I had to go to create a work that would help others heal and heal myself. And then the Mom's Guide is really designed to be a workbook of sorts, similar to Tracy's, where it's guiding women through a process. So that's me. I'm also a speaker and a transformational life coach, and as Tracy said, a book writing coach. And I live in Wilton, New Hampshire.
Thank you, Casey.
Thank you.
Awesome. Kathy, can you show us your 16 cookbooks?
This is my latest book called Rage Baking, The Transformative Power of Flower, Fury, and Women's Voices. This is my 16th book. I have been writing books probably longer than most of you have been alive. I started writing books in the 1980s. They have all focused on food in one way or another. And I am a food journalist. I'm also the resident chef on the NPR show Here and Now. I talk about food as a way of talking about really everything, it being the foundation of everything from health and wellness to anthropology, sociology, religion, the way that food touches every aspect of our lives. And I love writing books so much, which is why I keep doing it. And I'm excited to be here and share what my 40 plus years of working on in this field.
Awesome, Kathy. Thank you so much. Thank you. Okay, Mary Marcdante, calling from San Diego, California.
Yeah, I'm first of all, it's just great to be in the presence of all these really, really amazing women and your stories and your books. And I never expected to be an author. And it was, I came to it reluctantly because I didn't believe in myself that I could actually do it. But I had written a secret memo to myself in a sales course that I took back in the early 80s that said in 1984, I'm a best-selling author. And it was so bold, and I didn't share it with anybody. And I found that piece of paper 20 years later when I was moving, and I had just signed my contract with Simon & Schuster. So I'd completely forgotten about it. But for me, I came to this with from my mother being very, very sick with ovarian cancer. And there were no books out there to help somebody die at the time except Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's books. And I read that book voraciously, and I was like, what do I say? How do I help her? How do I respond to this woman that I never really knew? And really, she was a loving annoyance to me until she got sick with a diagnosis, and suddenly she was the most important person on the planet. And I didn't know how to go through the process with her. I would ask her questions. She'd say, don't ask me questions, just talk. Let's just be together. And then she would answer questions. And in the process of going through that, I learned that there were all sorts of questions that I didn't ask. And I started to ask other women, what do you say? What do you do? How do you do it? And discovered that there were a lot of women like me who didn't really know how to have a better relationship with their mother. So my mom passed away, and 3 days after she died, I had a dream. And actually I was sitting at my computer journaling, and she came to me in a voice and I said, where are you, Mom? I miss you. And I was, stream of consciousness writing. And she said, I'm right here with you, honey. And when you're ready, we have a book to write together. And I'll tell you more about it as we go along. But really the essence of it all is that it's now been 20 years later, and I've had the privilege of writing 2 other books, and I've worked with several other people on their books. So I have My Mother, My Friend, the 10 Most Important Things to Talk About with Your Mother, and Living with Enthusiasm, How the 21-Day Smile Diet Can Change Your Life. And also worked with other speakers and writers, Raising an Aging Parent and Courageous Living. I was a consulting editor on that. And Zen Pilot, and a new book coming out called Peace Pilot, who I've worked with for the last 6 years. And then also worked on this with the city of Chula Vista. I was the project manager for Chula Vista Centennial, which came out in 2011 and won 4 National Book Awards. So I'm here to say that if I can do it, all of you can, and you just need to say yes to yourself. And then to just continue to sit in the chair and write. So more to come, but thank you, Tracy, for sharing all this and for having all these amazing women here to speak.
Thank you, Mary. And I think we'll call a night and just say, just sit in your chair and write. And that's the strategy. Okay, Tara Whitney, who self-published her book. So Tara, tell us about yourself.
Great. Hi, everybody. This is really lovely. Thank you, Tracy, for inviting me to be a part of this. My name is Tara Whitney. I live on the seacoast of New Hampshire, and my book is called Hungry, Trust Your Body and Free Your Mind Around Food. And I published this in July of 2019. I wish I could remember the moment I decided I was going to write a book, but when I did, what amazed me is it felt like the book was just inside and ready to just pour out, because it actually came together very, very quickly. And it's really a book about my own journey and my relationship with food and my body. And I'm an intuitive eating counselor, and so I share my journey with emotional eating and overeating cycles and how I was able to come to a peaceful place with food. And I realized that what I had learned wasn't something that I was really reading in other places. So I felt like what I wanted to offer could really help people, because it was just my process and my journey and what really, really worked for me. And I just felt like it was my responsibility to share that. So I'm sure I'll be able to share more, but that's me and my book. So.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Tara. So I think what I'm going to go ahead and do is just create a gallery with the panelists, and then I'm just going to kind of go through and ask them questions. We have a small group, so I think maybe we could probably, if people raise their hand, I will call on you, or you could put some questions in the chat, and we'll always have time for questions kind of at the end. But let me just double check to see how many people that I can pin. And let's see. There we go. There's Tara. Okay. All right. So we have our panelists here, and you guys have all talked a little bit about kind of what maybe brought this book to life a little bit. But can you just talk about, for your first book, or maybe if you want to talk about a recent book, where did your idea come from? And several of you have mentioned that. But also, how long did that process take? I mean, was it something that you've been thinking about for years and then put pen to paper? And then once you put pen to paper, how long did it actually take you to get it, let's say, to an editor? Like, what was that time span for you? What did that look like to give other women an idea of how long this process can take, or maybe how short? So Kathy, why don't you go ahead and start?
Well, Rage Baking was unusual because it had to come out during 2020. It had to come out before the election. So it was an expedited process, which is to say, I worked with a co-author, Catherine Alford, and we put that book together in 6 months, which is astonishing because it involved over 40 women and gathering essays and interviews and writing. To give some perspective, I am working on a memoir right now that I've been working on for over 5 years, and I'm nowhere near done. So the process can take, in the case of Rage Baking, there was a publisher, there was a contract, there was a political timeline for it. It needed to happen before the election. Therefore, we worked so intensely and hard. But on average, the books that I've written have taken anywhere from 6 months to 2.5 years. And then this memoir, sometimes I think I'll be writing it for the rest of my life. But it really depends on so many factors. But on average, most books take over a year.
And Kathy, I would just ask you from a cookbook perspective, do you have to, I mean, that's more than just like editing, because do you have to have people taste the recipes? Like, how do you decide what's in there? And do you have other people try those things? And do the publishers have to try them, or all that kind of stuff?
Yes, I always have other people trying it. I have sort of a trusted group of people who love to cook and are anxious to try these things. My kitchen will produce results because I know my kitchen. And if I just hand you a recipe, you're going to have a very different experience. So it's often important that if I have a gas stove, that you test it, that I give it to someone with an electric stove. It's very important also if the recipes, I think they're simple, I think they're fast. Well, I've been a food professional for over 40 years, so of course it's fast for me. My husband always says, that would take me 4 hours. You just wrote it's a 20-minute recipe. So yes, you always need at least one other person testing it. I would develop a recipe, which is a much more of a spontaneous process, and then I'd make notes, and then I retest it myself. And then when I feel that it's in decent shape, I write it, and then I pass it on to at least one or two others. Often a recipe is only tested one other times. In the most extreme cases, I had a cake once that just, I don't know what it was, 22 times until I felt like, that's it, we're done, the end. Also, but with text, with essays, with writing, with memoir, sometimes your first draft is the equivalent of picking up a phone with your best friend and just spitting it all out. And then it's like sculpting. You have to edit. You have to edit again. Someone else should read it. You have to edit again. It's a very long process, and you kind of have to embrace every aspect of it, or it's torture.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
sometimes also torture.
Yeah, it's patience, right? You've got to go through that. Yeah, awesome. And Casey, why didn't you talk about this? I know for myself, when I worked with Casey, she gave me that structure that I really needed to be more disciplined and have deadlines every time that I saw her. But can you just talk a little bit about what it took for you to write your first book, especially because it was such a healing process for you. But also, what does that take to help when you help people to help them be consistently writing and consistently showing up for their book, right? Because it's so easy not to sometimes. So
Yeah, sure. So for me, it was a 5-year process, start to finish. And that included finding an agent, finding a publisher, going through all that. But the important piece that I feel like I want to offer here is this was a book that came to me. I never saw, like Mary said, an accidental author. That really rings true with me because I had no intention of writing a book. And it was like little signs from outside. People are saying, when are you going to write a book? When are you going to tell this story? But it was really the moment for me where I found and discovered my why, was that I went through this whole process and had to learn it and figure it out on my own. And there were truths I spoke that most people wouldn't dare say out loud. And I thought that I need to be that person who stands up and gives voice to truths. And if I'm the only person who does it, great. So there are instances where the book itself, you can begin the process from that point, looking for the agent, for the publisher, with a book idea, with the concept, and pitching it that way, querying it that way. But as a unpublished first-time writer, it was in my best interest to start the writing itself and create the book. So that's what I did. And it was really my actual first draft was pen to paper. Everything was written by hand, actually pencil, and had to find a typist to type it up for me. But the interesting part for me is what you're speaking about, Tracy, is I got to the point where it went from, I'm going to write a book, and people are like, oh, you're going to have a blog. No, it's actually a book too. And working around, as a mom with 2 young children, working around their schedules so that I'd write from 5 to 7 in the morning and 10 to midnight. And then, the weekends was family time, and I'd try to squeeze in a little bit. And the moment, probably 2 years into the process, where it was like, this is a being, this is a living being that wants to be brought to life. It's time to get serious about this, and it's time to make this a priority in my life and to declare myself. And it was really the moment I remember everybody's ready to go skiing and off ski racing. And I said, I'm not going, I'm going to stay here and work on the book, thinking the ceiling might collapse in on me. And everyone was like, all right, have a good day. And I was like, wait, what? That was that easy? And I spent all this time. And that was the moment where I had to really then find what works for me and how do I write and what's a schedule for me. And so, you know, you can look outside yourself and try to find that answer that lives within someone else. But I think it's a lot of trial and error and a lot of, I'm in my writing voice and the zone more in the morning? Is it later at night? Is it in the afternoon? And also knowing that just like when children are growing, that can change as well. So for me, I tried to follow others' prescribed methods of doing things and really realize, that, okay, I'm going to write every day from 9 to 12, and following what someone else's guidance and realizing that wasn't really right for me. And, you have to have one place where you write. And what I found, especially with this type of writing where there was a lot of vulnerability involved, I actually wrote every word from my bed. I set up this big pillow and a lap table, and I had to be in this really safe cocooned space where I felt I could let those words out. So it was, for you, Tracy, it was really finding what works best for you and how do you structure your days. So it's rather than looking for the answers out there, it's great to collect how does everybody else do it and then try it on for yourselves and find that right fit, sort of like a really comfortable, well-fitted, cozy sweater, like, oh, that's it for me. So that's what I would have to offer about that.
Yeah, awesome. And was that, as you mentioned, that was a really cathartic process for you?
Yes, very much so. But it was also, so it was at that point where I really began this. Okay, I'm actually committed to this. I'm really going to write a book. I want to take this to the next step. I want to commit to it. That's when I myself hired a book editor who really was a book writing coach. She didn't call herself, but that was really the role she played in my life. And that's when I found, as we would go through the book together, that the places where there was the deepest trauma, I would typically write maybe one sentence, and then the nurse walked away down the hall. And that would be the place where together we'd go back and expand on that and take oftentimes weeks, if not a month, to really get myself back into that scene in that place where I'd ideally, one some of the best stuff I learned, but that to enable my reader to feel as if they were standing in my shoes, looking out through my eyes, hearing what I was hearing, smelling what I was smelling, tasting, feeling, so that they were in that scene with me as I was going through these deep, traumatic, vulnerable moments.
Wow. Yeah. And that brings you back to all those moments. So
Yeah.
awesome. Thank you, Casey. And Mary, so why don't you tell us, when your mother came to you and said, we have a book to write, what did you do then?
Oh my, talk about reluctant writer. I had much bigger dreams if I was going to write a book. It was not going to be about my mother and me, and that was probably one of the biggest surprises. When I had that moment, I called my sister immediately and told her, and she kind of laughed and said, right, and as in RIGHT, not RITE. And then I literally, I did not know what to do. I had no idea. How do I write a book? I don't know how to do this. And I spent 3 years mucking around going, I should write a book. No, I shouldn't. I don't want to write it about my mother. And I was also at the time, I should add, my career at the time was as a professional speaker. So I was traveling the country and the world speaking on women's health and communication and stress management. So I just continued to speak. And then about, oh gosh, it must have been a couple of years later, I got into therapy because I said, I've got this voice in my head and my mother will not go away. And she keeps saying I have to write this book and I don't want to write it. And and we talked, and I journaled a lot. So I've been journaling since 8th grade, kept diaries, all that kind of thing, which I love to do for myself. But then um, I was speaking at an event, and a colleague of mine who was at the time writing Chicken Soup for the Mother's Soul said, Mary, that story you tell about your mother and squeeze my hand and I'll tell you that I love you. We should put that in the Chicken Soup book. But she said, I can't guarantee it'll get in because we get over 2,000 submissions. So, if you don't mind, it may not happen. I said, fine. And I made a deal with my mother's spirit that night because she kept saying, write the story, write the story. And I said, okay, if the story gets accepted, I will write the book no matter what. But if it doesn't, you are out of here. You leave me alone. And 9 months later, I came home to a message on my voicemail. That's how long ago this was, right? On my voicemail machine. And it said, hi, this is Chicken Soup. We want you to know that your story's been accepted. It's one of our top 10. And they had all these measurements of how did it make people cry, how many people cried, how many people laughed. I mean, there were really a lot of factors involved. Anyway, I just happened to look at the calendar. Oh, and I forgot to mention, before my mother died, we made a pact that if there was something on the other side, she'd find a way to come back and let me know. And it was, one of these kind of, what else do you talk about kind of things? I mean, I really was kind of struggling there. But anyway, I looked at the calendar and it was the 6th anniversary to the day of her death that they called. So that was my, okay, I'm in. I don't know how I'm going to do this, but I will do it. And then the next day I got a call from a friend of mine who I had met about 6 months earlier. And she said, what's new? And I told her about this dream that I had had with my mom and all these things happening. She said, I need that book. If you will write it, I'll sell it in New York. She was a literary agent and I never wanted to impose myself on her. So she took it to New York. And I mean, there's a lot that happened in between, as Casey and Kathy have talked about. It's a process. And my experience of writing my books is you really have to look at it like a marriage. It has its own life. It has its own way of speaking to you. And you have to decide how committed you are to it. And I wasn't always committed. So my first book took me 10 years and my second book took me 6 months. But there's some stories to that I think will help you in terms of writing that we can share a little bit later. But thank you for letting me share that. It's always a surprise to me when I come back to visit it.
I love that. And I remember, Casey, you kept saying to name my book, like my book had a name, and so it was like we had a date and I was going to see my book. So I think it helps put it up higher on that priority list. Like this is a real thing, this is not just maybe someday. So
Yeah, I
all
have
right.
heard the marriage. I love that. But I would, with you, Tracy, I had talked about it's almost like a pregnancy. You have a baby, a being within you that really, really wants to be brought to life, but it is its own being. As like, any of us who are mothers know, children are separate from us. So they are their own being with their own intentions, goals, agendas, all the rest. So rather than thinking of you as the owner of this book, if you're in partnership and you can be in communication, like I encourage you to do, Tracy, and talk to the book, talk to this being, who are you? What do you want me to know? And that, seems to, that helped me a lot, and it helps a lot of people that I work with, so.
Awesome. Thank you, Casey. So Tara, so you wanted to bring your book to life because you felt that others would benefit from hearing your story. But talk a little bit about, this is your very first book. You didn't have any publishers banging on your door, like how did you bring it to life and make sure that it got the time and attention that it needed to come to life?
Yeah. So a couple things. And I agree, Mary, it's nice to reflect back on this whole process because like you, Tracy, I feel like this was and is to date one of my most proud accomplishments is my book. And from start to finish, interestingly, we're sort of likening our book to the birthing process. Mine was pretty much 9 months. I started writing on October 1st. I think I pretty much had my book to an editor around the end of April, sort of early May, and then it went through the editing. Like I was doing some editing before then, but really the editing and the book designing and all of that was another 3 months. So the heavy lifting was probably a 6-month process for me. But like I said, the book was just gushing, pretty much gushing out of me, and I had spent some time making sure that I had the time set aside to dedicate to it. So there was a couple things that I did that might be helpful. The first thing I did was I thought about who I was writing the book for. And I took the time to really understand who that woman was. And I also got clear around how I wanted her to feel when she read my book. So I kind of and probably the biggest thing that came to mind was that I wanted her to finish my book and feel hopeful. Like I wanted her to feel that she had a solution, that she and that she was understood. Like she didn't feel alone and that she was understood. So those things really helped me when I wrote the book to just keep going back to because and that's been probably some of the greatest feedback I've gotten, like, oh, I feel like you were talking just to me. And when I finished the book, and I did get some like, wow, you understand exactly where I am right now. And so that was really powerful. The other thing I did was like, I realized, okay, I'm talking about my relationship with my body and how that's evolved, and I'm talking about my relationship with food. And it sort of hit me that I needed to let my body write the book. So I needed to get out of my head and into my body and the felt experience of sharing what I needed to share. And so while I was writing my book, I couldn't do it as like a complete intellectual exercise. It had to be an embodied experience. So that meant I had to sit my butt down on my meditation cushion every morning. I had to take really good care of myself. I had to, when it was sort of like, okay, it's time to stop, I had to stop. And just like I think Casey mentioned too, just kind of being aware of what are the right times for me to write. I had to really tune into when my creativity and the flow of writing for me felt the easiest. And I had to really honor that. But I was definitely awake at 5 a.m. writing super early for 2 or 3 hours. And it just became a muscle that I strengthened. The more I did it, the more I showed up. I tried to do that at least five times a week. It just became easier to do. It just was like, oh, 3 hours of writing, here we go. Let's get this done. And I just did it. But I had a really solid outline too. So I wrote to the outline and I spent a good amount of time on that outline so that I knew the flow of the book. So when I showed up to the book, I knew what was next because I was writing to the outline. So.
And had you given yourself a deadline?
I did really aggressively because that's kind of the way I work. So I think it was sort of like, oh, maybe April 1st. Like I just sort of knew I could really just get it written. Oh, by the way, the other thing I did is I gave myself permission to write an average book. And I think that's the beauty of being a self-published author. Like, because I realized that I could either write the best book I could write at the time and get it out to the world and move on with my life. Or I could spend another 12 months moving my book from like, say, a B+ book to maybe an A book. And I didn't need to write an A book. Like I gave myself permission to write a B book. And that was, I think for me, even in my own relationship with food and my relationship with my body and my relationship with perfectionism, like that was a really healing thing for me to do because I recognize that I can put something out to the world that's just my best work at the time. And I know today I would go back and write a completely different book. And as I work on my next book, I just kind of am recognizing this is the best book I can write today. And that's okay for me right now. And it's better published than on my Google Drive.
Well, and I love that, and I think, especially, you as a coach and a speaker as well, it really helps you hone in on your story. It really helps you just like get clear on what you want to say. And so I think it's helpful for many reasons, right? So even if it's just your B book, it really helped you clarify all your messages and get clear in your story and things like that. So maybe we'll jump
Yeah,
into the next thing,
absolutely.
Tara, and I'm gonna just have you segue. So you knew before you started the book that you were gonna self-publish, or did you start searching for publishers, or like what was your process there, and what ultimately led you to self-publishing?
Sure. I considered all options. I talked to some more boutique publishing houses, and even went through the process of like, what would it take if I had to submit this to a larger publishing house, and how long would that take? And so I considered all of the options, and I realized that time was a really important element for me, and control. Not like weird, like obsessive control, but like I wanted it to be my book. And I didn't want to negotiate with anybody about it. I really wanted it to be truly, I wanted me all over it. And that was all. And that was what I wanted. And so, um, and I also realized that what I had heard from talking to other authors is that marketing the book would be on me no matter who published it. And so it was kind of like, well, if it's on me no matter who publishes it, and a publishing house isn't going to put me in front of a wider audience, like that's my responsibility, then I just kind of thought, you know what, I might as well take all the proceeds myself and take the put the cost in on my own and just make it my own. And so luckily we have some great platforms that we can publish our books pretty easily, on our own, with thanks to, Kindle Direct Press and other platforms to share our books with. And so I found that once I figured all that out, and that definitely took some time to educate myself on how to self-publish my book, that it was just really nice to have it all in my hands.
Self-published, because I know you went through a service, it was like a self-publishing house or something. Can you give us a little more detail for anyone who might want to research that?
Yeah. So, well, firstly, I sourced all of my support through a platform called Reedsy, which is Reedsy. That's where I found my editors. It's where I found my copyright editors. It's where I found my cover design person who was fantastic. And what's nice is that you can see the work that they've produced. You can look at their reviews, and there's just a ton of fantastic resources there. And then I did a lot of research, and then I just decided that I was going to do a Kindle and a written copy, and that I was going to publish to Amazon, obviously, but I was also going to publish out to Ingram Sparks. And so Ingram Sparks is where libraries and a lot of bookstores purchase their written copy. And I liked that because I think it's a little scary to put our eggs all in one basket, which is the Amazon basket, even though Amazon sort of rules the world in a lot of different things. But to take our book and just the idea that I would just have it into one platform just didn't sit right with me. And so I that's what I decided to do. I went with those two different avenues with my book. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much for sharing. And I think I'll jump over to Kathy Gunst. And you've probably worked with so many publishers over the years, Kathy. Do you have some advice for people based on, I don't know if you've self-published any books, but I think you've gone through publishers. So what's your take on bringing your book to life and putting your baby in someone else's hands, and some of the pros and cons of those?
Interestingly, most editors I have found, and I've worked with a lot, are more hands-off than you would even like. They have so many books on their plate. They have a deadline. They have, say, 16 other books they're working on at the same time. So partially I'm listening to you, Tara, and thinking, it's brilliant. It's just great. The advantage to going to a publisher, and I've been through a lot of big ones and some small ones, is that you often get a lot more attention and not quite hand holding, but they will listen more and give you more time if it's a smaller press, particularly if you're writing a first book. I would say, don't dream for a Simon and Schuster, don't dream for a HarperCollins, because you tend not to be treated very well. It's just like, okay, write your book, you send it in, it goes through an edit, it comes back, you go through another edit, there's a copy editor. It's a whole long process, but I have often felt like the editors don't test the recipes. I know that they read it, and we talk about things, but it's not as collaborative and as beautiful a relationship as one might seek. Which is not to say that it's not wonderful to be sent a check when you sign a book and you have some money, particularly if it's in the world of food, where you're putting out a lot of expenses to test recipes and buy ingredients. So, I mean, here I am 16 books later listening to you, Tara, thinking, God, maybe I'll do that with my memoir. I mean, who knows? And I don't have any judgment on it, which is another really important thing. The goal is for your story to be heard by people other than your 4 best friends. And however you can get yourself there is what's important. Not like, oh, I want to go with, I want it to be an Eat, Pray, Love story. I want it to be, I want to go global. I want it to be big. Those things it's like the acting world, 1 in 100,000 people make it big. You have to want to tell the story because you want to tell the story, not because you're attracted to the idea of a big New York publisher, or you have a fantasy that you're going to hit the bestseller list. It's not why you do it. I think somebody earlier mentioned the notion of passion. It's a lot of work. And if you don't maintain that passion, and if you don't feel committed to your story, it's not going to happen. I have a really quick question for Tara. Now that your book is out, what would you grade it?
I think it's a B.
A B, did you say?
Yeah, I think it's a B. Yeah, maybe. I think yeah, I would say that.
I mean, I think that it's such an interest. The reason I asked is I found that really fascinating, because I always try to do my best work, but I don't know exactly what that means. And if I have a 6-month deadline, it's almost in a way, I mean, it's a whole long story, but in a way I did my best work because there was so much pressure, and that's all I did. It's all I thought about. I woke up with it. I went to sleep with it. I was possessed by it. If I had had a 2-year deadline, it might have lingered on and been a different kind of book with a different kind of passion. So I was interested in that comment. I bet it's better than B.
Well, and
our own harshest critics.
yeah, that's true. But to your point though, Kathy, I absolutely know it was the best book I could have written at the time. I just know that next time, I'll keep the more I write, the better I'll be at writing. That's how I feel.
And I feel the same way, having done this for over 40 years, that my work gets better, that my writing becomes more evolved. And it's like anything that we do, the more we do it, the more comfortable we are in those shoes and the more we can excel.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Thank you, Kathy. So I'm going to jump to Mary, who had a literary agent call her, every person's dream. So what was that process like for you to, it sounds like it took you a few years to actually write the book. And then how did you get it out into the world? Was that an easy process for you? You know, what did you compare and go to other publishers as well, or how did that work?
I was a new author, so I really just did whatever my agent said. And as it turned out, I started, so 19, this is quite a long time ago, but once the chicken soup story got started, that really started the marketing machine for the potential for my agent to work with the publishers. But I had to go through the proposal process. Tara, for all the things that you didn't want to do, I jumped through so many hoops, I can't tell you. When we took it to New York, before I even got to New York, my agents agency decided that because I was a first-time author, the only way that they would work with me is if I co-signed with an editor, because I was an unproven person. And so I hired an editor from New York who was with Penguin Books at the time. And when I took her on, I was really excited because she'd written several books, and she wanted to write the book. And I said, no, I want to be a writer. I want to write the book. So can you help me with that? So we had to work through some things there, but she was with me on the whole book. And then then when I went to New York we wrote the proposal together. And then Lori, who's my agent, took it to New York. And we got, within a day of presenting it, one of the houses immediately called and said, we want it. So they put it through a 3-week marketing process. Kathy, I don't know if you went through this with any of your situations, but at the time, it was a 3-week, they owned it for 3 weeks and they could decide how they were going to do it. Well, the day that they were supposed to come back and they had accepted, they were ready to sign the contract, the CEO of the company said, yeah, I don't think we're as interested anymore. So it got dropped. And I was like, oh my gosh. And Lori said, wait a minute, don't go there, because you had one interest and we'll just keep going. So she had their first, a list of 15 houses. And then we went to all 15. Some of them came back, said, it's an article. I don't have a mother. I mean, every answer you can imagine. But then she got a call from Random House, and it turned out that the editor who was interested actually had a mom who was going through ovarian cancer. So they were very interested in the book. But I hadn't written, I'd written a couple sample chapters at that point. And then we went to New York, and I freaked out because I got into this meeting with the CEO, the VP, the marketing person. I mean, all the people who make the decisions. And they put me through a 2-hour interview and basically came back and said, we need you to make your mom the problem. And I said, I can't do that. My mother wasn't the problem. The problem was our relationship. And so they made an offer and I said, I can't do it. And that night I'm in tears to my agent saying, what do we do now? And she said, well, we've only got one other option. And I said, okay, can you call she was also an author, can you call your editor and ask her if they'll meet with me at Simon & Schuster? And she said, they never do that. I said, could you just maybe try? And I'm going to just tell you the rule of 3, ask 3 times before you give up, because she said, okay, I'll do it. Well, they decided to see me. And 45 minutes later, after getting into that meeting the next day, we had an auction that went back and forth between 3 different houses. And I got so uncomfortable with the process. I said, stop, let's just do this. And I ended up working with Simon & Schuster, their Fireside division. And then once that started, it was another gosh, that was we signed it in February of 1999, and the book didn't come out till 2001. And there were some delays because Simon & Schuster was bought out by Viacom, and there were all sorts of changes. But the good news was that they came back to me after I wrote the first half of the book and said, we're going to delay the book by a year because we want you to keep writing. You just write whatever you want and we'll keep going. And it was about a year. And then I ended up giving them 150,000 words. And they said, oh, no, that's way too big. That's 2 books. So the first book came out in 2001, and the second book is still in my computer. Oh, the Google Doc. Yeah, no, I don't want to do that. But anyway, lots of content. So
Awesome, Mary. Okay, thank you. So it was not just as easy as a literary agent calling you.
yeah, no. But just one last thing I'll say about that. In the 3 different books that I've written, my first one was published Simon & Schuster. The second one came on the heels of that book at a women's conference where the CEO said, we loved your women, your My Mother, My Friend book. What else do you have? And Procter & Gamble, who was the sponsor of the conference, said, we want another book. So she said, I told them you have one. And I said, I don't. She said, well, write one now, and because it's already a deal. So that was the 6-month process. And I self-published with Procter & Gamble as the sponsor. And then the third book, which came out, that came out in 2003. And then 2006, I had some bunion surgery that went awry, and did a whole bunch of blog posts on it, had a bunion survivor blog, and turned that into a book. So there's a lot of different ways you can do this. And that was through Amazon and Kindle. So there's a lot of possibilities.
Awesome. All right, thank you, Mary. And Casey, so you've kind of heard from everyone, and you've helped guide women through this process. What are your thoughts? You've published with publishing houses, and have you looked at the self-publishing? And do you have, like, I know I did that. Do you have some stories from women who've done both, or what is your take on this?
Well, the first thing I think, which is evident, is there is no one path. There are so many paths. And then once you're on that path, it keeps going like this. And, and that's the story of my book. Having a publisher, the publishing house, when Borders went out of business, with their distributor and the way it's all set up financially, they couldn't stay afloat and had to back out of their contract, had the first agent in New York, and Tracy knows the story where I end up covered head to toe in a smoothie and get this real sense that she's not the right person, decide I'm going to self-publish, end up with another agent coming in, going with a small independent publishing house, which I love because I did have a lot of say in the whole process, a lot of one-to-one individual attention, but they were distributed by Random House. So I had the benefit of the distribution network. I do feel like 9 years ago, when I was in the publishing process, there was a real stigma around self-publishing, and that seems to no longer be the case anymore. What leads me to the point is I feel like in the beginning, when we were talking about the creative process, we kept all of us leaning back into what's your why? What's your reason for wanting to write this book? I feel like in this part, the publishing part, it's what's your goal? What do you want the outcome of this to be? So for Tara, who has a coaching practice, who has a business, if I want this book to be in the hands of clients and future clients, the business is there first. The book is serving that end goal. And so it's really, what's your goal in this book? For me, with my first book, it was truly to get the story written because I felt I didn't have a choice. And I would love to get it in the hands of women that would benefit, to help them know that someone else has walked this path before them. But I wasn't attached to the outcome per se. It was really about writing the book. So if I'd had a publisher or a literary agent ahead of time and a deadline, I knew how I operate, that the book would have been dead in the water and I wouldn't have moved any further. I needed to give myself as much time and space as I needed to get that written, and then start dipping my toes into the publishing process. So again, it's that, frustrating answer, but no one size fits all. And it's what works for your case and what's your goal in writing this book. First, why do you want to write it? And that's what will keep you moving forward. What's your end goal? And how does this book serve back to, keep your business moving forward? Is it just a story that you really feel like needs to be told? So that, I'm not sure I'm getting straight to, but, ask a clarifying question, Tracy, if I'm not really touching on it, but that was the piece I felt was important to bring in.
Well, and I think that kind of leads us to what I wanted to ask, if you guys wouldn't mind sharing, is so, in a dream world, we get this nice check up front, and we write our book, and then they sell it and we make millions of dollars. But, in reality, can you maybe just give a sense of, when you go with a publisher, what percentage you get of the book? And do you typically, Kathy, you're an established writer, and so they know what they're getting into, and that you would, maybe you would get more of that upfront, income. But my sense is when you go with a publisher, and I haven't done this, is that you get a pretty small cut of it. So, if your why is to make $1 million, maybe not so much. But if your why is to, build a name for yourself so that you can have a show on NPR and, give it to your clients and stuff, it's a different thing. So just as women are looking for this, if you could give a sense of, self-publishing, I know I put a lot out to publish my book. It cost several $1,000s, but then I got, I charged $35 for it. And so I would say, honestly, I broke even and maybe made a little bit more. I didn't make, $1 million, but I was able to cover my costs and make some money and have some fun doing it. But anyone want to just jump in with that? Like,
Well,
what would you tell to say to someone?
I think it's important that you're not just adding up the $35 per book sales. Then you hosted workshops built on that book. Now you've created the Women's World Wellness Exchange, so it isn't, a column, right, to, check book sale, check this is what I put in. You've broadened so much from that. So you need to look much bigger picture in that way.
I think that's a really good point. It's not how much of a cut you get. I have a daughter who's an editor. What they do when they make an offer, the publishing houses, is they do what they call running the numbers. They put out feelers with their sales forces. They put out feelers with major bookstores. What does a title like this appeal to you? Where do you see placing it? Would it be a front book? Would it be a buried book? And they make their offer based on the buzz that they get from these various people. Does the author have a track record? You see it all the time. People sell first books and they go huge. There's a young woman named, I hope I'm pronouncing it correctly, Salika Jihad. She's written a book about when she was 21, she was diagnosed with a really rare, extremely terrible form of leukemia. And she wrote a book about her journey. First-time author. However, in the middle of her illness, she ended up getting a column with the New York Times. The book was sold. It's #2 on the New York Times bestseller list. It's a completely unexpected book. The way that Eat, Pray, Love was, the way that books all the time pop out of the field and you're like, we didn't see that coming. Who is this person? Why is this subject interesting? Why do we want to know about a 23-year-old's leukemia and all the surgery she's had and how her life fell apart and how she rebuilt it? Why did that book hit? What was it? And you have to tell yourself, and you have to try to believe it. That's me. That's my book. And whether it is or isn't, it's like a sprint. It's like you run to the next step, to the next step, to the next step to try to get to your end goal. And you don't do it, you're not going to make $1 million. That's the one thing I'll tell you categorically. It's not going to happen. But it is intensely fulfilling to finish a book. And it is intensely fulfilling to see it published, whether you do it yourself or it's through a big publishing company or small or regional or whatever it is. And, a lot of it is putting ego aside and just doing the work and believing in yourself and believing in it. And I'm also wondering if those of you out there are thinking, well, I don't have an agent, I can't do this. When I sold my first book, I didn't have an agent and I sold it and I came at it backwards. I sold the book, was so excited. I was 21 years old. I was ecstatic. And then I started calling around some agents. And of course, the agents wanted to deal with me because I had done the hard work already. And luckily, several of them said, this is a terrible offer. Come with me. And I did end up signing with one of them. And I think my offer increased by 5 times. So, usually you get an agent first. But anyway, going back to what everyone keeps saying, there's no one way to do this. But you can't do it for the money. You're screwed.
Anyone want to add anything?
I just
before
got to clap. That's just Kathy. Woo-hoo. That was really good. That was really good. Yeah,
Does
there's
anyone
a pro right there.
Does anyone have any questions specifically about publishing? I'm going to go ahead and open this up to the floor. Does anyone have any questions? Andrea.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been great. My book is all written and professionally edited. Just a couple weeks ago, I finished it. And this whole time, I wrote up a great proposal. I took a proposal workshop on how to write one, sent it out to publishing houses. So I've been working on getting it published, when I first started writing it, when I had the first couple chapters, and I was able to send that to publishers. So it's been almost a year, and I'm still really confused about publishing. It seems like you just sort of keep throwing it out there to different places, and I do a lot of research and see which ones have books like mine. And but of course, I'm first-time author. I don't have an agent. So I'm getting back, I've got back 4 or 5 no's at this point. And now I'm looking at hybrid publishing, which is another whole area, taking a lot of research too. But anyway, any comments on, am I on the right track? Should I just keep going and keep looking? I'm hesitant to put out, anywhere from $9,000 to $14,000 is what I've seen. My book is for women who have had emotional neglect in childhood and recognize it as low confidence, people pleasing, all of that stuff in adulthood. It's my personal story as well as my professional work that I do. So I know the audience, and and this is really information that feels really important to me to get out to so many women now, to raise the feminine vibe on the earth, to raise up women.
Do you have any quotes from professional people in the field or people that have large followings? Do you have any kind of endorsement type quotes on your proposal?
I do not. I really am, not even that well known. I mean, I'm a nurse practitioner. I've been for, over 30 years, and I'm really even not that well known in my own profession, let alone, from anybody famous.
Andrea, Kathy, I'm sorry, did you want to?
No, go ahead.
Do you do any speaking as a nurse practitioner?
I do. I've done workshops. I've done a lot of teaching. The book is psychological and spiritually based, personal growth kind of stuff. So I've done lots of that kind of workshops and speaking, but it's all locally,
Have you done
but for many years.
Have you done anything on Zoom lately? With it, like any kind of with women's wellness? I mean, I'm asking for a couple. The other thing is, what's your website platform like right now? Like what kind of everything, when I got started, there was the internet was not doing, we didn't even have a clause in my contract that they came back, a year later and said, oh, we got to put this in for digital. But one of the things that my agent has told me as we're looking at my next book is, what's your platform? That's all the publishers are asking, what's your platform? Like Kathy has, this amazing PBS platform that she's
Right.
on. So thinking ahead, but bringing yourself back and saying, what am I doing every day? The Chicken Soup guys, the way that they built their book, and I really believe this works, and I used it when I was marketing my books too, is 5 things a day for marketing to get your message out there. What are you, anything is, that's going to help you promote that, is gonna help.
Yeah, that's my situation. Do I spend the money on someone to help me with that? Because I'm not great at that. So I've had, have it all over Facebook and Instagram. I have a great website on LinkedIn. I have blog articles. I have articles published by Elephant Journal. I've been on a podcast. So I've put all that stuff out online as much as I can. But yeah, not a lot of traction, probably a total of like 1,000 people.
Well, keep going, just keep going, because if you want the book out there, you just keep working at it every day. The other thing I'm wondering about is, have you gone through any books that have a similar flavor to yours and looked at the name of the agent that's inside the book?
Yes, I did that. I've done only one, and I wrote to that agent and did not hear back. But yes, so I'm starting to think of all those little.
Remember rule?
Yeah,
Do
good
not give
idea.
up. Just keep checking
Yeah.
in.
I have 2 quick questions, and one is a comment, I guess. Does your book have a title?
Yes.
So every time you're talking, anytime you're anywhere, if we ever go back to cocktail parties, you have to say, I am the author of blah, 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 and see what kind of a buzz there is and see what kind of an interest. Did you, in your rejection letters, did it look like they had read it, or were they just forms?
2 out of the 5 said they liked the book. I just didn't have a big enough platform. So I know that's the issue.
So quickly, the other thing I would say is when you're comfortable with it, to ask if they would have a phone call with you, like ask for 5 minutes. Say,
Okay.
I'd love to follow up. I so appreciate that you looked at it.
Yeah.
What would make the difference for you? What kind of numbers are you looking for? In other words, you have their ear.
Yeah.
If only for a minute, I'm the author of blah, blah, blah. I got your letter. I so appreciated you taking the time. What would make the difference for you? What are the numbers that you need? How, sometimes people are kind and they'll take the time. Sometimes they're not.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Thank you. Well, thanks everyone. And Mary, I think I know you from somewhere. I recognize your name at like 20 years ago or something.
Where are you? What's
I'm in Manchester, New Hampshire.
I did a lot of East Coast promotion for my book. And this is another marketing idea. You say to yourself, what's possible? 10 years after my book was published, it was on Amazon, and, pretty much the media and everybody had forgotten about me. Mother's Day, I occasionally get calls, but I stopped promoting it because it was, I was on to some other things. But I got a call, again, a voicemail message, and this person said, hi, I am a PR agent in New York, and we have a client who is looking for a mother-daughter expert. And we are interested in talking to you because of your book. And she said, the client is, they do HPV testing for cervical cancer. And I mean, it was shocking to me because I got off the phone, called him right back and said, I wrote the message, called him back and said, not only am I a mother-daughter author, but I am a cervical cancer survivor. And I was hired, and it was a 2-year contract. It was, a very, very lucrative opportunity for me. But more important was that I was able to redeem, all of the things that I had. I'm just so grateful that I got to do it because it saved people's lives. So all of you, make sure you get your HPV tests. And if the doctor says no, ask for it anyway.
So we've kind of jumped into to marketing. Go ahead, Casey.
Well, I wanted to add to for everybody, building off of what Kathy was saying, the cocktail party conversation. part of what I was doing, in a land where we weren't in isolation and we could, but there is also the digital version of this is I was going to other authors' book signings and I was staying after and I was introducing myself and I joined the New Hampshire Writers Project and I joined a Boston, and I was going to writing workshops and I was immersing myself in this world. And there's an author, maybe some of you know Cy Montgomery. She's out of Hancock, New Hampshire, and she wrote The Good, Good Pig that, is in its 9th printing and sold millions of copies. And I went to her book signing for Birdology and I stood in line and the book was still in, a manuscript form. And I actually queried 60 different agents. So those rejection letters kept coming in my mailbox. And I had made up a postcard that had a book cover I made, the title, all my contact information on the back of the book. And I, told Cy about the influence she's had on me. And I had my own little runt, equivalent, and my daughter was with me. And that was it. And I gave her the postcard and, she was really generous with her time and we had a nice connection. 6 months later, I received an email from her and she said, I was just cleaning out my work bag and I found your postcard and I wanted to hear how you made out with the book. And she introduced me to her agent. So, it's really connect with other authors, connect with other writers. As evidenced by tonight, authors and writers are really generous. We want to support others on the journey because we know how damn hard it is to make your way. So introduce yourself to other writers, authors, and and ask, like Kathy said, can we just talk for 5 minutes? Can I just ask what was your journey like? And I'm sure it'll be a lot longer than 5 minutes, as you can see, because we do go on and on. And then someday you'll be paying it forward too. When someone's saying to you, how did you get your book published? So it's that, and another author out of Peterborough, Katrina Kennison, who wrote The Gift of an Ordinary Day, Mitten Strings for God. I went to her book signing and it turns out her brother had had a premature baby. And, and I had spoken up and she became a really big supporter and her husband had been in publishing and she said he was willing to talk to me. So cast a really wide net and really allow yourself to be vulnerable in asking other people about their journey and to potentially help you on yours.
Right. Thank you so much. That's such great advice, you guys. Appreciate it.
So I thought we've got about 15 minutes left. I thought we could just talk a little bit about marketing. And then at the end, if anyone else would like to share their story or their book, if it's written yet, if it's not written, if it's just an idea in your head, I thought it would be nice for you guys to just verbalize that and bring it to life a little bit. So we'll just take a couple minutes at the end so you can pass on that or share with us if you'd like. But I just wanted to come back to marketing because it sounds to me like really, from what you guys have said too, really the marketing starts even before your book. The marketing is about building your platform and building your mailing list and putting it out there. My book is coming. And I know for me that, when I did that, I wish in looking back, that I had really built a program around that or an offering around that versus just coming out and saying, my book's ready, buy it. So if you guys have some ideas of how we're not going to go into a whole thing on marketing, but the importance of building up your mailing list. And then when your book came out, how did you talk about it? How did you sell it? Because as you said, even though the publishers, if you had one, might have been marketing it, you still were the voice. You had to go to the bookstores. So what worked for you guys and and maybe what didn't? So I'll just let you guys just jump in. I think all your mics are off.
Anything you can think to do is worth doing. In the publishing world with more traditional publishers, there is something called the 3 month out, the 1 month out, the 2 weeks out, the 1 week out, and pub date. And there's kind of a campaign to build to that. And that's something that any author can mimic. Using social media is free advertising. In fact, the only thing I do on social media is to promote different things I'm working on that I think people might be interested in hearing. There are people that pay publicists. I have had a publicist that's come with every publisher, and they have done jobs that range from a B- to an F. No one has done a job that I was thrilled with and thought, oh my God, finally, because nobody cares as much as you. So if you're self-publishing, you have to do all the work. I think it was mentioned before, go to conferences, speak up, raise your hand, be that person that says, I've just written a book about women's negative feelings. I've just written a book about women in their relationship to food. Be that person that posts, be that person that calls into a radio show. I mean, no one is going to know about your project if you don't tell them. And even, you know, I've published with Simon & Schuster, Random House, Chronicle, all these big publishers. A book is considered new for 3 to 6 months. After you pass that time period, they don't care about you. You're an old book. It is one of the very few businesses whose business model makes no sense. And I say this after being in the business for over 4 decades. Like, if you invest in something, which is what a publishing company does, wouldn't you want to make money? Wouldn't you want to do everything possible to spread the word and continue doing it for a year or 2 years? It's inexplicable. They're just on to the next project. It's like high school. You have a boyfriend, you're done with the boyfriend, you're on to the next one. It's really a little bit like that. It doesn't make sense. So you can't be shy about it. You can't think, oh, I'll just let it have its own breath, its own life. It doesn't exist without you. And I do you know, I'm extremely lucky. I have the NPR platform. I've written for a lot of national magazines. Anytime you do anything, the first question you should ask is, will I have a bio? And what you say is, you don't say, I'm kind of sort of doing a book, or I have a proposal. You say, Kathy Gunst is at work on a memoir about 4 generations of illness and its relationship to food. This book doesn't exist, but in my bio, it sounds like I do. And my dream and my hope is that somebody reads that and says, oh, I want to know more about that. I'm going to get in touch with her.
That's great. That's great.
Tracy,
I just want to validate that, Kathy, to all of you, that wherever you can, and listen to your intuition, because you will, when you're living in this world of your book, it will tell you the places to go, the people to talk to, what to do. And I mean, I was sitting in an airport after a National Speakers Association convention, and I saw a man stocking books in the Anderson bookstore. And it was, at the time, I can't remember the exact name of it, but it was the Dallas airport. And I went up to him as he's stacking, and I said, oh my God, someday my book might be here. And he looked at me and he said, fat chance, lady, do you know what it takes to get a book in here? And I said, no. I said, oh, but I just would be so great. And I mean, I was so earnest and so naive. And he said, well, you seem like a nice person. I'm going to give you the name of my manager. Call him. He may be able to help you. That call, over a year's time, I must have called, I actually planned it out, looked at how many times I had called different people as a result of that meeting. And it was 15 calls over a year to different people leaving messages. And one woman, second to last woman that I called, said, don't call us, we'll call you. In fact, don't ever call back here again and bother us. And I was mortified. And then a year went by and I thought, you know, everything I've learned is don't give up. Don't give up if you really believe in it. So I called back, and it turned out that the day before, that person had been fired. And the person who answered the phone was the CEO of the women's conference that I had been referred to. And she said, I need that book. I'll take 5,000 copies. Who's your publisher? I mean, it was a less than a 5-minute call. And I said, I'll get back to you. And I had a 2-year conference. That was the one that went from a women's conference of 16 city tour with the book in every single one of those conferences. And then a follow-up with Procter & Gamble saying, okay, we want your second book, and another year of conferences speaking. So honestly, write your book, sit in the chair, do your platform, trust yourself, listen to all those crazy moments, and just keep doing it. Just keep doing it.
Something I want to add, I love the intuition piece because it's like follow the signs, the breadcrumbs and all that. But what Kathy was talking about, one of the things with my publisher that was really appealing is they promised that they would always keep it in print. Because that was one of the things, you pour your heart and blood, sweat and tears and a lot of money into this. And then suddenly 6 months later, it's off the shelves and it's gone. So they've always kept it in print for me, which I've been greatly appreciative of. And what I wanted to add to that is, the why, what's your goal, building your platform, but it's who is this book for? So who is your target audience and why will they benefit from your book? And that's where you can really hone in on your marketing is if these are my people and this is what they need to hear and they'll benefit from, it's that, overused word, but branding, really you branding yourself and your book. So your message is in a line and it's that message that you're constantly putting out there and building an audience, not just around this single title of a book, but around yourself, you as the author. And, these books don't have a voice until they get into the hands of the readers. So like my metaphor of the baby, you have to speak up for your books. Your book can't speak for itself. So giving voice for the book and being its champion. And so it's a little bit of separating yourself from the rejection piece and like, oh, I feel so embarrassed and vulnerable that I'm doing this. I'm not doing this for me. I am doing this for my baby. And I'm going to, get my baby into the best place possible in the hands of that. And one thing I just want to offer is speaking in terms of audience. Sometimes it's so intimidating to think of, little me and my little book and the big world out there. And a tool that I find really helpful is if you can write that book and write the best book you can write and write it for one person. Think in terms of who is that one woman that I know when she has that book in her hands and, holds it to her heart, it's going to potentially change her life. And an exercise I often have a lot of my clients do is they write a fan letter to themselves from a reader, actually signing it. Tracy, do you remember who your who signed that to you? Sometimes it's
I can't remember, but I still have that letter. I loved writing that. That helped me a lot.
and
That's
on
such
those
a great
days,
idea.
yeah, and on those days when you're like, screw this, I'm out. I can't do this anymore. It's not about you. You're doing it for Sarah, who wrote that letter and said to you, that book you wrote changed my life. And here's why. And make that letter as detailed as you possibly can. And forget about everybody else out there and just do it for that person that wrote you that letter.
Two other really quick points. One is, how is this book different than every other book that's out there? How is your book distinguished from 12 others within that tight field? And within that question, why are you the one to write it? And your answer can't be, well, I'm sure there's somebody that knows more, or, it's your book. So you have to own it and you have to sell it. But when you're writing a publisher, you have to do something that's called a market analysis. So you have to find like-minded books. So if your book is about women's negative self-images, you have to find 10 other books that are related to that, talk about how they sold, and then you have to write to them about how this book differs and why you and only you are the one to write it.
Awesome. Tara, do you want to add to that?
Well, yeah, I'll share a little bit about kind of on the marketing side, because what I kept hearing, I'll share a little bit like what I did and kind of how I'm looking at this now for my second book, which is what we're doing is we're building community and having conversation with community consistently is really what marketing is. Like being able to connect with the people we're meant to serve, have conversations with them, but do it regularly. And, this is something I am trying to practice in my own business, being able to show up on platforms every single day. and being in the mindset. So if you're kind of like, I hate marketing, I don't want to market, I just want to write my book. You know, the reality is the book will not sell itself. You know, we are solely responsible for selling our book. And if you're wondering, when should I start marketing my book? It was yesterday. Even if you haven't published your book yet, it was yesterday. And that means that you, as Tracy mentioned, having a mailing platform, sending a weekly newsletter to your community, writing to them, sharing with them helpful information, showing up on Instagram at least, if not LinkedIn and Facebook, and being able to have conversations with your community and asking them to, like, talking about the topics that you're writing about, starting to get them engaged. And, you know, when I was publishing, I did a couple things. You know, one, I asked for some early reviewers, and I was really grateful that I had some people that were willing to do an early review of my book, and how generous they were, but that was something that took some time. I also, that was probably one of the big things that was just really helpful for me to kind of say, hey, you know, I'm going to give you 6 weeks in advance to review this early copy, and then will you jump onto Amazon and review this with an honest review? Like, don't just give me it. Like, I'm not trying to buy a review. I'm trying to get an honest review. And that has been really helpful too. And then, you know, asking people to just be willing to share the book, being able to say, hey, can we, you know, invite other people to read this book and talk about the book. I have a podcast channel too now. So that was something I'm about a year in on that. And that is also a nice, you know, I named it the same thing I named my book. So that's like another way for me to just keep talking and demonstrating my own expertise. There's, you know, marketing is probably another, you know, day of discussion around how to do this. But I think if, like, sitting in a new author's shoes, I think it's kind of getting over any hurdle around it and just kind of mentally and emotionally embracing how important it is to consistently show up regularly will be the biggest benefit to getting your book into more hands.
Awesome. Thank you, Tara. And thank you to all the panelists. This was so useful. I think I got chills like 5 or 6 times at night. So we have just a minute, and I would love to just turn it over to our audience, if you may. And Andrea, you shared a little bit about your book. Did you give us the title?
The title of the book is Lovable: Healing the Sensitive Heart.
Beautiful. Does anyone else, Kath, do you want to share the name of your book that you're working on?
This is like sharing a baby's name before it's born, Tracy. You realize that, right? People are gonna be like,
sorry.
oh, that
Okay.
was, you know, that was the bully from my 5th grade childhood.
You don't have to give
You can't name your baby that. No.
Just tell us about your book, just real briefly.
Are you talking to me? So it's For the Love of the Moon. So we seem to have a love theme going here. And it's a compilation of 25 years of cooking and recipes that have been tested and used hundreds of times. So I feel a responsibility. Actually, kind of the why behind it was a big hurdle for me, because I had a lot of pressure for this book. Like, people, where's your cookbook? When's the cookbook? When's it coming? And I was very busy, you know, running a restaurant that I honestly didn't have the focus and the time. And now I do, due to COVID. I'm forced into a retirement, which after 26 years, I'm grateful for. So I'm sinking into it, but I'm writing it for my granddaughter. So that's my why, because I want her to have my recipes and all the goodness. So so finding that focus, and it's not the general public, honestly, because I just can't seem to rev up for them. But so it will be with the next generation in mind.
A legacy.
you all. It was incredibly inspiring and informative. And really, I know, it is sometimes just showing up and showing up. Tara, you said it so beautifully. Consistently, show up and give it your best that day. And that's all we can do, right? So I thank you all. It was, I'm inspired.
Yeah. Sonia, do you have a baby you're birthing that you
I
want
do. Yes, Casey knows this. So it's Getting Off Your Knees, and it's what divorce, death, and disease teach about healing, transformation, and relationships. So, and
Beautiful.
thanks to Casey, Emily is the name of it, which is my, smaller self. So it's just so grateful for, all of you and the nuggets. And Kathy, I started to tear up because you said something that, all of you, it was just, everything was so wonderful. But I've always been training for long distance running, and I've set that aside, and I'm like, I've got to let that go. And this is my new adventure. And when you had said that about, what was it? Oh, the sprint. I'm like, yes, I know. And I'm gearing myself up of letting go of that temporarily to, create the space for this. So, yeah. So thank you to all of you.
Good luck with that, Sonia.
Thank you.
Nina, do you have a person?
Yes, so I have, it's basically done. I have a collection of poetry and essays that I have grouped them into seasons, the 4 seasons, just based on their feel. And just need to do it. So this is very inspiring, and I appreciate everything everyone shared.
Awesome, thank you. Well, gosh, this is exactly what I was hoping for tonight, is that this peer-to-peer, we could go out and read books on this and talk to a million people, but this was so beautiful. And just, I thank you, the panelists, so much for coming and sharing your stories and your time and all the things that you went through on your book. It really means a lot. I really did get chills a lot. And I just,
Thank you
what a
all. Thank you.
beautiful group this was. And I'm looking forward to more workshops and more support from each other, because we're all in this together. And just thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank
I'll
you.
share the recording, and I'll make sure I put a link to all the authors with their books and so forth. So
Can we check back in 6 months?
yeah, we'll do a follow book publishing 102.
Yeah. Oh, I would love that.
We just might. All right.
Thank you.
everyone.
Thanks again.
Have a
All
good
right,
night.
thank you.
Bye.
It was beautiful. Thank you.